Mother Against Addiction is a global nonprofit organization, and we are here to support mothers by providing resources to those who are affected by addiction. And we believe that mothers are the driving force of the family unit, and we would like to support that. So everybody, every family unit can thrive. And our speaker series is fully free of charge, and you can come every Saturday, and we would have a guest speaker to speak to you on an addiction topic. And before we start, there's some housekeeping items. So this session is recorded, but only your voice will be heard and not your face, to maintain confidentiality. And if you have any question during the talk, please use the raise hand function, or put your question in the chat. And today our guest speaker is Dr. Rael Morley. He is a professor at the School of Social Work with Texas State University. And his education background is he has a PhD in educational psychology from University of Texas. And his research focus is on mindfulness, mediation, violence, large-scale brain networks. And he has over 18 peer-reviewed articles on mindfulness, violence, self-control, gender roles, and compassion. And with his professional experience includes parole officer, case worker, lecturer, expert witness, mindfulness trainer. And the key advice for mothers from him is that practice self-compassion, mindfulness, and accept struggles as part of the human experience. And with that said, let us dive into the question for Dr. Rael. Dr. Rael, thank you for being here. Can you please tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Well, first thing, I'm a parent. I am non-binary, and I have 4 kids, 2 which are my biologicals kids, and I have 2 which are my partner's kids, my bonus kids. And if they get a chance to read this, I always like to build on them before I do any talks. But I'm thinking of y'all even right now, if y'all ever watch this. And I can say that I've had quite a journey through my life, and I've had great opportunities to do research. And I feel that mindfulness meditation and compassion are very useful tools to help us not only get through a day, but to deal with a lot of our life struggles and a lot of the difficulties humanity is going through now. So, yeah.
Thank you so much. And could you share how addiction has personally impacted your life or the life of someone close to you?
Yeah, thank you. So, in terms of myself, I'm lucky that wasn't an issue that I've had to deal with personally, but I've had people very close to me struggle with addiction, and it's affected me very deeply because these individuals are very close to me, and I've seen their struggles, and I see them try really hard, and I've seen them had times where they just kind of fall, and then the shame they go through when they make mistakes. And it's hard for me not to be impacted by that. I'm a very empathic person. In many ways, it motivated me to want to study psychology in the brain, and the neuroscience behind all that stuff, because seeing their struggles and seeing oftentimes that in many cases it was the mental illness that they were covered up, or trauma that they were trying to cover up in the process, and going to either stimulants or depressants. But stimulants, I think, were the ones that most of the folks close to me were addicted to, and seeing how that impacted them, how the personality changed, and the shame when things come down, and the cycles that they've been going through. So Yeah, it's impacted me quite a bit. I always think about it at some point, at least one time in a day.
Yes, exactly. So I can relate to that, and that's why I'm in the field of therapy myself to help people. And then, what advice would you give to mothers who are struggling with their addiction or supporting a loved one through theirs?
Well, that's a very good question. So first thing, it's hard. And I don't think there's a way to avoid that, is you have to accept that it is hard, and that it's going to be difficult to see through at times. It's the best you could do is like a mist. It's the uncertainty, right? You're kind of on this tightrope in the middle of a misty fog, scared at all turns, right? You know, maybe it's shaking at times and you're trying to navigate your way through it. And it's difficult, and it's very easily to feel isolated and alone. And mothers in particular take it upon themselves, and they really motivate themselves. And I'm not going to say it's only mothers, but I kind of feel the way society and people grow up that. So I want to say other parents can be just as motivated. But I will say, though, from my personal experience, the moms I know who've gone through it, it's very difficult. It's very shame. It's easy to blame themselves. And I think that's a common thing that moms do, is they like to blame themselves, and they take part of that shame on. So what I'd like to tell them is, you need to be compassionate to yourself. And that's the only way that's going to free up you from being compassionate to the child or the person that's suffering in that case. Or if you're the one who has addiction to this, it's just the same. Often addiction is a cover for something else, a trauma, as I mentioned, or mental illness. So accept that, one, what it is, what it is. It is addiction. It is a lifelong struggle. But it's not just your struggle. It's a struggle that many people go through. And even folks who don't necessarily go through maybe drug addiction, there's other kinds of addiction out there that involve the same or very similar brain chemistry, such as video game addiction, very similar brain chemistry as stimulants or watching shows or pornography. You can go on, but in the end of the day, it's all goes back to the same thing. And all that is to cover up yourself, to cover up your trauma, to not look inside yourself. So to realize it's okay to feel shame, but shame is not going to necessarily help you. So accept that. Treat yourself or those impacted as if they're just, look at them as babies that need to be taken care of, and that it's okay. The world leads us to these conditions which allow things like addiction to happen because of trauma or because of whatever's happened in their life. So don't give up on yourself. Realize that other folks are struggling, whether it's mental health, addiction, or poverty, or all kinds of things that human beings go through. And for you to be able to accept that, to be mindful of the fact that we're all in this together. Humanity is in this together, even if we ourselves are not the ones who are struggling with your problems in particular, that everyone's struggling and everyone needs to help each other out. And be objective to yourself and realize that you're not the worst person in the world. That's the other trap that shame falls into, is you're the worst person, and you're not. It's not your fault. Decisions in lives and things end up that way, but it's not your fault. And don't give up when you make mistakes, because you're going to. Life is hard. Mistakes happen. To keep trying.
Well, thank you. It sounds like you're very passionate about addiction therapy, and you have a lot of advice for the mothers, and you would be a very valuable resource for us. So thank you. And then number 4, what were some of the biggest challenge you faced during your journey with addiction, either personally or as a supporter?
So I think with my early on, because the individuals in question that were very close to me, that went through, and I don't want to be very specific because that's their journey to tell, but to me in the beginning, I was young, and it was easy for me to blame them and to shame them. And because I didn't understand what's going on, I didn't get it. And part of that was because I was blocking my own pain and suffering. And it was easy for me to judge at that point. I have learned over time through, I credit my mindfulness practice and my practice to be self-compassionate as a key thing to it. But I feel that I was able to head on that challenge. And I think I'm really good at not doing that now. I think I'm much better at just accepting that those involved really have difficulties. And I wish that there was a way to make it easier for them. But again, it's their journey to do and their pathway to unfold, and I can help them, but it's really about them, and my role is to be there for them. And so I think that was the conclusion I had out of that. But yeah, I think it's easy to blame. It's easy to shame, especially because addiction at times, I think there's a societal instinct, or society tells us that it's a fault, it's a decision, it's a character flaw, but really it isn't. It's something that people who struggle with trauma have to, fall into. It's a trap, and there's many traps. That's one of many that folks could end up in, but it's definitely not their fault.
Yes, so I can relate. We use our own experiences to work in this field of therapy. So that's the bottom line. And how did you find the strength and resources to keep going during the toughest moments? Like, what role did the support system, therapy, or other resources play?
So, well, first thing, I think getting an education was probably the most important thing for me, because it opened the door for me to consider all kinds of options, and it gave me access to research that other folks did not have, and it allowed me to inform my family, which help them better. So I feel that's a big part of it. I also think mindfulness meditation, and that I got into at a very early age, probably around my adolescence. And I think that as I got to explore that more and more and more, that was extremely helpful, because it allowed me to look within and look at my own suffering. And so I wasn't as we call defense mechanisms in therapy, to project that internal shame onto my close loved ones that suffer through it. So that was a big one. And then self-compassion, which relates to that, because that's part of mindfulness. The way our brains work is there's a tendency whenever we feel shame to turn off that self-reflection part. And I guess the strongest tool that I think, and that research kind of shows to, is compassion that others give you or you give yourself, because both are options. And that particular brain network that causes us to do that can be triggered the other way, and can, through compassion, allow you to self-reflect and provide compassion and empathy towards those who are suffering. So I feel that was also a big tool that I had. And finally, I think ultimately my own self-acceptance of what's going on in my life allowed me to be there more for those who were struggling with their own issues. And let me add further, as I once said before, shame was something that I had early on. To these individuals, if they ever get a chance to listen to this, I am proud of them. They've gone through a lot. They've come a long way, and they've done amazing things despite their struggles. So I am very proud of them and honored that they could be in my life and that I could be of service to them. So I guess and of course, support network, going through my own therapy was important, and getting my own mental health treatment and taking care of myself and accountable to myself for my own mental health problems was another big deal. And that allowed me to help and guide others in my social network to do the same. So I feel that was immensely useful, because at times, I will say, even though mindfulness, I think, is a awesome thing and help, that there was times where I looked at myself, there's aspects of myself that I just did not want to look. And so sometimes you need help and others to hold you accountable to truly understand and transcend yourself. So
Yes. So yes, so when we talk about support system therapy and other resources, it can be its whole lecture in and of itself that
Oh yeah.
you can run the whole lecture to your students there.
Yes, I could bore you all with neuroscience and research all day.
Right. And then, what message would you like to share with mothers who feel isolated or hopeless in their battle against addiction?
So, what I would tell you is, first thing, it's easy to shame yourself, and I could tell you to not do that, but we all know that's hard. What I would tell you is to do your best to try to transcend that isolation. And part of it involves realizing that you're not alone, to connect with others that are going through that process. And that allows you to show compassion for them, which of course teaches you to have compassion for yourself. And so I will say self-compassion is very hard in of itself because we are our own worst critics. And so that's kind of why I think when you realize and you start treating others who are going through the similar situation with compassion, you realize that you deserve it too. And I think so that's probably the number one thing, is to accept it, that you're part of a universal struggle as human beings. And we all as I mentioned before, fall into traps along the way there. And addiction's a very nasty trap to fall into. But part of that also is a life journey to struggle and help others, to practice compassion and to teach yourself compassion. So to see yourself as a great part of a greater human experience. And that when you realize that we're all in this together, you're not alone.
And that's why we are healers. And then, are there any specific resources, program, or strategies that you found particularly helpful in dealing with addiction?
Sure. So let me first state that mindfulness meditation helped me out a lot in my life. And so in that, it's very useful. It teaches you to self-reflect. It helps you maintain calm, even especially if you're feeling isolated. The one person you need to check in sometime is yourself. So I really advise that. Mindfulness practices don't necessarily have to be zenning out, doing something like this, but there are other things out there such as Tai Chi, yoga, certain types of martial arts, all of which help you focus on yourself. I also think exercise is really good too, because that gives you natural levels of dopamine. That's very helpful. And that they all, again, teach you self-compassion. And beyond that, just connect with others who are going through similar struggles. And just do your best to keep up hope, and know even during your darkest moments that those moments are just moments, and that there's always something better down the line.
Thank you. And is there anything else you would like to share about your experience with addiction or your journey through recovery that we haven't covered in the previous questions? And this question is particularly interesting because it's give us a chance to share more on what we have in mind,
Sure. And so first thing, let me start off by saying that it's easy for me to fall in the trap to talk about research. And that's great and all, it's important, but I think sometimes personal stories and experiences connect with others more so. And while there's many I can think of, one in particular really kind of like connected with. So I remember when I was just graduated graduate school, and I was managed to connect with a local jail facility that had a meditation program. And it's something I wanted to begin my research process with, and it was a research goal that I never got to do, was to do this area. And again, research says all these positive things. It was a theory, and so I took that out, and I after getting the jail allowing me to come in, inviting me to do research, I went in and witnessed before I actually began data collection this group that was meditating, and these were folks that were incarcerated, and it was very interesting too because they did a blend of meditation and yoga because they spend a lot of time in cells, so they don't get a lot of exercise, so they kind of blended the two. And I remember were all kinds of different interesting things that came up that I thought was useful and thought maybe this research is not just theoretical. One in particular specifically involved addiction. And it was this young man who I remember we were sitting in a group in a circle. You had a meditation teacher that was sitting there, and they're all telling stories. And he was talking about how he really wished that he had been exposed to mindfulness meditation and yoga sooner, because he felt if he did, he never would have fallen into the trap of stimulants. And that moment made me think, it's like, wow, this is more than just theoretical. It's more than just this. I think this is actually something that is real and that could really help people. So.
Thank you very much. Very insightful. And we have a question in the chat. With your extensive research background, what do you believe is the most misunderstood aspect of addiction, particularly when it comes to misconceptions parents may have about how to approach and support their children who are suffering from addiction?
That's a good one. So trying to think of good misconceptions. So first thing, I would say that I think while accountability in teaching people people going through addiction accountability is perfectly fine, I feel blame in making it sound like it's something that they did, or that's something that they should be ashamed for, and that's something that they have control over, is one misconception. So, and what I mean by that more specifically is, I feel that sometimes there's parents out there that are quick to use very authoritarian, judgmental insights, because a lot of parents have their own struggles and project that onto their kids, and they want to blame their kids and get angry because because there's a tendency for them to blame themselves. And so I would say that's one part of it, is it's not a blame thing. It's usually, and it's not addiction just in itself. Addiction's part of a greater symptomology usually, that there's something else going on, either undiagnosed mental illness, untreated mental illness, a trauma, being LGBTQ can often be behind that, and not being in an accepting household, to being in just a very like threat-ridden environment. All these things could be rationales why someone falls into that trap. And so to not think that they're bad, or that it's a character flaw for them to have addiction, especially because I feel that there's a lot of very societally accepted addictions that don't receive the same amount of shame.
Right. Okay. Well, as a follow-up question from Larissa, is there a specific meditation practice you would recommend for those dealing with addiction? And what's the minimum daily time commitment you suggest for the meditation?
Good question. So what research has shown in general, and I feel that's applicable to meditation, specifically to addiction, is that they've tried different kinds of meditation. They've measured mindfulness meditation practices, is probably that Kabat-Zinn came up with, that's received the most attention in psychology. But part of it's because it's based off of Buddhism, and Buddhism at times, the way they've taken, has a way to come up very secular, which I think resonates with a lot of people. But I will also say that there have been studies on meditation from transpersonal or transcendental meditation, from Sufi meditations, from Tai Chi. So there's various other meditations out there. And long story short, they all kind of end up with the same amount of effectiveness. And they have a similar impact that therapy does. Not saying that you should not avoid therapy with it, but it does have a very similar impact. So I don't have a specific one outside of the one that you connect with the most. So if someone, for instance, likes the more secular practice of mindfulness meditation, which doesn't have to be secular, but because Buddhism is not secular as a whole, it is a religion, but the practices may come off that way. You can always add more to it, but there's Christian practices, there's Muslim practices, there's Jewish practices. And if those work more for you, if those connect to your meaning-making system more, the idea of a God, for instance, in the Sufi practices, allowing your mind to allowing yourself to disappear, to empty your mind, and then invite Allah to come in, that works for you better. It works for many people. In terms of time, I guess there's not, research hasn't always says more better, but we live in a realistic world that has limitations. So say if you could do, I mean, ideally, I prefer to do 45 minutes plus a day if I can, but it's just not realistic every day. Do some is what I would say. You know, if you can do 10 minutes, that's great. Research study, I think if you do 20 minutes a day, or over time, you're going to have a significantly younger cardiovascular system just by meditating. So do any you can and look at it. It's kind of a pathway to help with the aging process too, and to help with dealing with trauma too. So I would say 45 is nice if you can get it, but where realistically, you got to do what you got to do in a day. I will also say that there are meditation practices that are more intensive that will require where you take a long, lengthy time away from socializing or even talking, and those have a very powerful impact. But again, there's limitations in the world that we have, and I think once upon a time, if you look at a lot of the meditation masters, they had people taking care of stuff for them. Not everyone has that privilege just to go away for a week or 2 weeks just to meditate. So if you can do those practices, by all means, go for it. But if 10 hours a day is all you can do, then do those.
Thank you so much. And then we have Eva here, and she's asking, Dr. Rael, you have such a concentrated background. What has changed in the last 10 years within the mental health approaches for those struggling with addictions, especially women in general?
Okay. So I can speak of more so in terms, and again, I will also put the caveat that as a researcher, we see things at the kind of like the frontline level that the practitioners, as many folks will see, may or may not have trickled down to it. So I think one thing that I think is interesting, and if it's coming more, if it's not here yet, is the reevaluating the DSM. And that's what to look more at neuroscience changes rather than based off of symptomology. And I think that's going to be particularly valuable for addiction. So that's coming up. And I also think that understanding the differences between how different substances impact people is something that I think is kind of new and interesting, and that there's other kinds of treatment besides mental health treatment that I think is also going to be useful, such as like transcranial magnetic stimulation, as an example. But I also think one of the things that have really changed, and I think is really important, I think there is kind of a paradigm shift that folks are getting away from the model that that addiction is a personal flaw. The medical model, I think, which tells us, kinds of phrase it like a disease, and I don't know if that's the right way either. Rather, it's just that it's something that we all have our own individual barriers to do, but our system's so based on the medical model, it's hard to break out of that. But taking a holistic look at addiction and like what situations or circumstances impacted addiction, led to that person to become addicted in the first place, and treating that too, and not just trying to tell the person don't take a substance. So more acceptance of addiction as more of a mental health focus. And I think the use of mindfulness meditation practices have really gone up, which I think is probably very useful. And in terms of specifically for women, I don't know if I could state one is better than the other, but I do think the value of mindfulness meditation, specifically for mothers, is that even if they're if they can even fit a moment in the day, and they can't connect with others, because as a parent, for my own sake, that has my kids for equal amount of custody as my co-parent, and we're good friends, it does feel very isolating. And to have even a moment where you can connect with yourself if you can't connect with someone else, because it makes you a better parent. And I think that is very useful, because I think mothers really do want to be good parents, and mothers who are struggling especially want to be good and take it hard on themselves when they make mistakes, because it's easy to do as a parent. So I think having access to mindfulness meditation does give something that you can do when your kids are around. And I think that's very valuable to women, and especially moms.
Well, thank you. And as a follow-up question on that, do you believe society today hinders or places limitation on the mental health wellness of a person? Treatment within the US or abroad? Is this more of a cultural barrier?
That's a very good question. And yes, I kind of feel culture does play a big role in it. First thing, I'd like to brag on the younger generations, because I think they're accepting therapy as just kind of standard practice. But I think, I don't want to go overgeneralize every culture, but I do believe that there is barriers that cultures place to think that mental health isn't a real phenomenon, or again, even mental health like addiction is a character problem, and that people themselves, if they have never gone to therapy, don't also have mental health issues. And so I think that culturally, yes, if people don't accept mental health as a real thing, then yes, we as a society are hampering and making it difficult on people to reach out for help. And I know many folks, particularly in Texas, where we don't have a particularly great record on mental health, there's a lot of avoidance and trying to blame the individual for their mental health issues, or caveats about how they could do things differently and they wouldn't be the way they are, and not realizing that there's neuroscience involved, there's situational factors involved that not everyone share. So within the U.S., yes. Abroad, it's hard. I don't want to, again, overgeneralize, but I can speak of those folks from me that do come from other cultures that also don't want to look at mental health as a real thing. And I think that is a common that does happen reoccurringly throughout the world. And the truth of it is a real thing. And education has taught us it's a real thing. So that being said, I do think the younger generations, as they've explored more and they see everyone is kind of having a need for mental health treatment, that it's like a doctor's checkup, that you're going to see a change. You already are seeing changes.
Okay, perfect. And then Larissa also asked what strategies or intervention can help prevent addiction, especially for individuals who may be at risk. And I with this question is relatable to Larissa, because she practices holistic health and meditation as well. So maybe in the context of meditation, spirituality, things like that, along that line.
Sure. And so, first thing, I think it's important to acknowledge one of the different risk factors. So addiction, people fall into it, or people get addiction often happens to folks because, again, they have traumas that were not treated, or mental health issues, which a lot of those are triggered by trauma. So I think that's it, is making holistically treating trauma in any way as it happens and to not just bury it is probably the dominant thing to do. So it's easy for when people experience trauma. Some folks will rise to the occasion and, change their life for the better. Other folks will bury it, and that leads to mental health problems. And some folks, they just fall in a cycle down. And that's where things like addiction come into play. And so being able to address trauma and teach trauma, I think, is one prevention. And I'm going to get to the spirituality part in a minute. I also think I obviously talked about mindfulness a lot and how I feel that is helpful. But some folks, not everyone may connect with mindfulness in the same way I do. So in terms of spirituality, which I think mindfulness is heavily connected to, spirituality is making meaning out of our life. That's just as important in the way I see things as the biology that you have and the mind that you have. It's to know that there is a larger meaning to make. And I feel that is important because I feel when you get into traumatic experience, I think there's a lot of research to show this too. Those who kind of take that experience and try to bring it into why this happened, right? This traumatic event and whatever that traumatic event is too, and make meaning out of it in a way to, they're the individuals who are going to change their life for the better in response to trauma. And I want to be very careful in that, not to blame anyone for their trauma, but rather just some folks get insight through their trauma, and that often takes on a very spiritual view. I think, to give example, there's a great TED Talk by Dolph Lundgren, boxer from Rocky IV, and he talks about compassion and his trauma growing up and how that led him astray. And then at some point in his life, when the darkness, after all these things happen, him able to forgiving his dad for abusing him growing up, led to him to be able to propel his life to help others. And so I think that is a great TED Talk to look at, but it illustrates very well that you can fall into darkness and you can fall into all kinds of problems. But if you take meaning out of it and you take it to a new place, that's your best way to get beyond trauma. And of course, even if addiction is already set its fin, that's the best way to get beyond addiction, is to find meaning out of it and to let that meaning guide you to helping others and making the world a better place.
Perfect. And then we have one more question here. Do you have your favorite recommendations to inform us about or direct us to within mindfulness meditation? So do you have like a favorite recommendation on there?
Oh, for types of meditation?
Yeah. So do you have your favorite recommendation to inform us about or direct
to teach you more?
Mm-hmm.
That's a good question. So, well, I figure as a good starter read for if you want to look at the science of it, which has been my focus, Kabat-Zenn's a great start. In terms of, so I would start there. In terms of great talks and TED Talks on the issue, I mean, there's so many out there. I mean, obviously I like mine, but as a personal bias, but tried to think of other ones that specifically really rang out to me as good ones for that one. But there are many. I would start with reading on Kabat-Zen in the beginning and mindfulness, stress-based meditation practices, because that's the one that received the most research. In terms of a starter, if you just want to taste, if you go to Dr. Christian Neff's website, it's a faculty member at UT, and self-compassion, I think selfcompassion.com, she has a couple different meditation walkthroughs. And there's one that's a loving kindness meditation, and there's one that's a loving kindness with self-compassion meditation. I used to show that to students in my classes, went to get a taste of it, and research has shown that that those are a particular awesome state mindfulness increase for the first time you do it. So I could definitely share, there's a link or something. I mean, that could be something we could do, but I would check out her meditation practices, and they're about 20 minutes long. And you do one of those, and I've seen people come out crying after doing them. So, but I think loving kindness as a whole, any of that is really good about the initial bump in self-compassion and mindfulness. and is particularly effectively strong.
Well, Dr. Rael, it looks like with all the questions that we asked you, the main questions, and then we delve into these question on live. Your talk has been very informative, very helpful, and as I mentioned earlier, you are a great resource to us. So we greatly appreciate your time and your presence. And at this time, do you have any comments, questions for us? And if anybody else has any questions, well, Larissa is getting into hypnotherapy. That's along the line of holistic health and health and wellness. So, do you have any insights on that?
I actually did some reading on hypnotherapy, especially when I was a grad student. I took a interest in it, and I even have a book on it somewhere. And I was fortunate enough to have one. I was when my co-parent and I, when my gender identity stuff first came out, we went to hypnotherapists, and I felt it was very helpful. And in terms of the similar, it does have a lot of parallel experiences to mindfulness. And I do think it is a useful skill for a therapist to have, and it is a useful therapy for people to practice. And I do know it involves not exactly the same processes of the brain, but very similar ones. And I think auto-hypnosis is something that meditators will do at times, as a side note. But I mean, it's helpful. Hypnosis is helpful. It's a useful thing to have and to go through. And I think that if you have the opportunity to find a really good hypnotherapist, it can really make a difference for you. In terms of the parallels to meditation, there are. I couldn't go through all the specifics. I mean, it is something researchers talk about, but it is useful. So, and often what I would say is there's nothing wrong with doing both, and they both can be helpful.
Well, thank you very much. And at this point, do you have any comments, any last comments or questions for us?
Sure. Well, I was going to say, looks like Larissa had one more question that I wouldn't mind answering, and then I would be happy to answer that question.
Yeah. So are there any early symptoms that might indicate a person is at risk of developing an addiction in the future?
Well, sure. And let me not overspeak that. There are people who focus more on that particular question. I can tell you just some of the ones I'm aware of. So anyone who experienced trauma, abuse, people who folks who are LGBT are more likely to be mistreated as a concept, or less likely to accept. And so addiction's an easy way to hide. ADHD is a predictor that could lead to it. And of course, trauma, PTSD, and any mental health diagnosis, depression, anxiety, all those can make one more susceptible to addiction or other negative life pathways. As the added thing I would say, one key thing to understand is addiction, like many negative life outcomes, is all about running away from yourself. There's something inside yourself. Stimulants activate the part of your brain that brings your focus outward. Depressants shut down all of that. They shut down your memory. They shut down your self-awareness. So anything that impairs self-awareness can lead to, the addiction's one many pathways to avoid yourself, to get away from the pain of being self-aware of your life difficulty. So bear that in mind. It's an escape, and self-reflection is the key to being able to get past that.
Okay. Well, if you say that, then that would lead into meditation, and I know that you are an expert on that. So how would you start your day with meditation?
Good question. So I try to start every day when I can. Doesn't always happen. So what I would do is, depending on your day, because if I'm going to work, for instance, I go to drop my kids off and go work like everyone else. But if I'm very busy, I'll take 5 minutes or 10 minutes, depending on which one. I'll sit in my office, and I like to listen to music because it gives me kind of a way to not have to be accountable to look at a clock every 5 minutes. I know once the music stops, I know that my meditation's complete. And so I'll hang out in my office, I'll shut the door, and I'll meditate. If I'm not working on a particular day, I will, or when I say not working, if I don't have a schedule that I work every day, but if I don't have a schedule that requires me to go do something directly in the morning, such as dropping kids off at school and stuff like that, I will go sit on the couch and again, put on a longer music video or something like that that's meditation-ish. I like to go with the seasons. I tend to do more, I like Sufi meditation during the summer, Celtic in the spring, in the fall and spring, and winter I like more Buddhist, Zen Buddhist ones. That's just my taste. But regardless, I'll listen to the music, and it's my key to stop. And once I'm done, I'll just take a time to reflect and quietly come back and get along with my day.
Okay, perfect. And one last question. What are your thoughts on computer gaming, particularly in relation to its potential impact on addiction and mental health?
Sure. So, and I'm glad you bring that up because one of the key things, as I brought up earlier, is what addiction largely entails. It's you escaping yourself. And dopamine, which is the drug that a lot of folks use as stimulants, is based off of that. Dopamine is not something you necessarily only get through stimulants. You can get dopamine from many different things. You can get natural dopamine through video games because it's little rewards that happen along the way there. It's hyper-focused. It's made to draw you in and make you excited. And these little rewards can give you the same kind of addictive qualities that you can get from stimulants. And, I think it's a big concern because it's easy as a parent. I think this as a parent, it's easy right now because we talk about screen time, and it's one thing that we all struggle with because kids want to see TV, kids want to play video games, and they all have the potential to give dopamine bursts, which of course lead to the same addictive qualities. And of course, things like porn, those also do the same thing. So yeah, that is a type of addiction, and it's very similar to, in essence, it's dopamine. So it's the same base chemical in the brain that creates it. And I think in a lot of times where people fall into that trap as these kids are escaping traumas at school or other things. So yes, it is a concern. And I think that parents should keep an eye out for too much video gaming. And if a person falls into the trap where they start getting angry if you break away from a video game, or if they start, avoiding things like baths and taking care of themselves, yeah, it's a thing. People do that. That is a type of addiction, just as drug addiction is. So glad you brought that up.
Thank you. Yes. I think that this last question is also very relevant because it's deal with the chemical pathway and it's deal with the real life scenarios, right? Kids play video games. We work on computers all day long, so it's very relatable and realistic. Well, thank you very much. And as always, I truly value your time and expertise and sharing with us. So at this point, do you have any questions, comments for us?
Sure. I mean, there's one more thing I just would like to share with y'all before you go is, I think a lot of this, which I don't know if I highlighted enough, is that our internal worlds are real too. And when we avoid those, they can create a lot of problems for us, and they can hamper us, our connection with others, our empathy, our emotional regulation, our ability to enjoy our lives. So addiction is just one cover for that. So regardless whether you're whatever kind of struggle you have in your life, don't neglect your internal self. They, whoever they are very important and should be valued. And just be glad you have one. So it's part of consciousness. So thank you.
Well, thank you for your perspectives on addiction, mindfulness, and the valuable and endless insights into the topic, into the field. And then we have an announcement to make. Our Monday night mothers meeting is canceled due to Labor Day. And we look forward to hosting you guys all on the following Monday. But the speaker series for next Saturday is still on. Okay. So thank you very much. And you have a blessed day, Dr. Rael.
You too.
And for everybody else, you enjoy the rest of your long weekend. Okay?